Hey everybody, this is Perch. I think there's a lot of arguments and discussion around comics that I think could be solved if you establish some basic ground rules up front. And ground rules sounds too formal, too stodgy. It's not really rules. It's just methods of how to communicate with each other. So, an example of this is when you get into these big circular arguments around, say, is the comic industry doing well or not? Well, you could spend a lot of time arguing that topic and not get anywhere because half the people are talking about the comic industry as it relates to Western based direct market floppy business versus people who are talking about it in relation to manga and scholastic and everything else. It's one of those things that is kind of a nerd cliche in that in a lot of these fandoms, almost any topic can be argued in almost any direction and everybody gets to be right or wrong. And there's no outcome that can possibly happen. So I think just basically establishing some basic sense of like, what are we talking about here can save people a lot of grief. I'm thinking about this from the standpoint of, I'll do videos, other people do videos, I'll get questions and topics, and the answer to a lot of things, if you're being honest, is it depends. It's not a black and white answer. If the question is, are comic books too progressive? I mean, again, it depends. What are we talking about? Are we talking about Western comics? Are we talking about Marvel? Are we talking about manga? What are we talking about progressive? Are we talking about social issues? Are we talking about superheroes as a general topic for the last 50 years have often been quote unquote progressive? But do you mean modern progressive? Do you mean kind of the definition of what a woman is, or do you mean basic truth and justice and all those kinds of pieces? Some people have pointed out that back in the 70s, several superhero comics were called social justice warriors. It's true. Superman was labeled as a social justice warrior in the 70s. And this is around the same time, kind of a little bit later, that he was screwing around with Lois Lane by like pretending that he was dead and getting bat ears and all kinds of crazy shit. He was defined as a social justice warrior. Now, obviously, the definition of social justice warrior in the 70s is extremely different than the definition of social justice warrior in 2022. That things have shifted. So I think that trying to understand where everybody's coming from can eliminate a lot of the arguments, but in a lot of cases, people don't want to eliminate the arguments. It's fun to argue about minutia, and that's if you've ever worked in a comic shop, been in a comic shop, hung out in a comic shop for any length of time, and full disclosure, I love those arguments. You haven't lived unless you've spent 8 hours talking about if the Hulk was exposed to a nuclear reactor, how would that interact with this gamma radiation? And at some point, granted, everybody has to admit it's like we are talking about fictional characters that do not exist. That still is true in the midst of all this. But it doesn't matter because you're having fun speculating on completely random, geek nonsense. That's part of the enjoyment of comics. Anybody would tell you otherwise is again not being honest with themselves. It's fun to speculate on this crazy shit. That's why people do it. And again, it's very easy. The first time you step foot in a comic shop and see two people arguing about who's stronger, Superman or Silver Surfer, it's Silver Surfer. But the first time you've ever been in that argument, the people who are there are very passionately laying out their cases and they're having a great time. Are we supposed to stop that? Of course not. That's part of the magic of comics. As weird and geeky as nerdy as that magic is. But I think a little bit of pragmatism helps, at least, keep us all kind of in line. There's a lot of things that should be true that, you can argue about shoulda, woulda, coulda kind of things, until you're blue in the face. But it's kind of like right now, the day I'm recording this, Joe Biden is giving a speech, praising kind of this relief that he put in place. And it's the Inflation Relief Act or something along those lines. And I made a comment that, hey, it would be whether you like Biden or hate Biden, this is the kind of thing where a good comms manager would tell you, hey, the stock market is tanking today. We've got the worst day in the stock market we've had for 2 years. It's plummeting, and it's plummeting because there was a far hotter, unexpected inflation report. And so if you're going to go out and give a speech, and I think Biden said we're going to have a speech and celebrate the Inflation Reduction Act and all this kind of stuff. It's like, again, you could be the biggest Biden fan in the world. Anyone with common sense would tell you now's not the moment. It's just not the moment. Even if, and I think a good economist would tell you this, hey, these two things are largely unrelated because they are a bill and an inflation report. Again, you could be the biggest Biden critic in the world. The reality is stock market goes up and down on various factors. Yes, some of those related to his policies, some not. There's a number of things that goes into stock market fluctuation. And there's micro changes that happen any given day. So, you can't blame Biden for all those. You can blame for some. You can blame all kinds of things for those. But the reality is, whether it's his fault or not, it's bad optics to have this speech. I made this comment, and somebody's like, but the stock market isn't reflective of the economy. They're two separate things. Like, you're missing, it was a good, I liked seeing that response because it underscored the point. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that they're disconnected. Yes, it is true. Anybody with a business degree, anyone who studies finance and economics will tell you, stock market and the economy are two different factors. They're linked. It's not like they're completely independent of each other, but they are two different things. But try explaining that to somebody who's sitting there and looking at their 401k and saw 20% of the value of it was wiped out. Now, again, if you study your 401k maniacally night after night, you're in for kind of a horror show because things are moving, depending on what you're invested in, things are moving up and down all the time. It's not like, the 401k is really, really dull, really predictable, and then suddenly one day it just, goes to shit. There's always movement in the 401k, and you can have up days and down days. Fine. But again, for somebody who's in that emotional state, doesn't matter. What does this have to do with comics? Well, if you're a longtime reader of the Avengers or the X-Men or a title like that, and you're currently reading a book that bears zero resemblance to the comic from which you originally started, reading it, it is a true statement to say, yeah, times change, new creator, trying new things. It's good to try different things. It's good to evolve the story. Yeah, I'm sure all that's 100% true. Sounds great. Is that going to make the person who, this long-term collector feel good about any of it? No. They're going to be pissed because their comic changed. And that's where the, understanding kind of the ground rules of where people are coming from their arguments helps. It helps you gain empathy. It helps you gain kind of an understanding of where someone's coming from. People who are super worked up and pissed off about something, and again, whether you think it's fair or unfair, if you've been a collector for a long period of time in comics and they've suddenly changed, you're probably going to be upset by that. If you think you're a strong enough negotiator, or you're great at arguing to the point that you could land an argument to tell somebody in the heat of passion, hey, I understand the thing that you've loved for 40 years is radically changed, but you don't need to worry about it. Here's why. If you have that ability to make that stick, God, more power to you. You're some kind of superhuman, because that's a hard one, and I don't think it's easy to make that stick. Just like with a lot of things in comics, there's a lot of different angles to where things are going, and we can either choose to deal with the nuance of those topics, which you can do, and it's just a matter of communicating up front, and I always think it's a good idea. Or alternatively, we can have kind of one of those discussions like we have in comic shops. And like I said, those are fun too. They are circular and they often go nowhere. And sometimes they get, unnecessarily heated and passionate and, at times batshit crazy. But, it could be done. It's just a matter of, being honest about what you have and what you're doing. So anyway, all those things said, it helps to explain what's going on. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thanks for listening.